Alright, today hopefully we will be fixing a very annoying problem on this wagon. Ever since I got it, and probably since 2 owners ago, it's had this. So if we put the key in, you see it has the tele 8 error. It has the visit workshop but not activated. So you got 2 malfunctions on this car. And then if you look, it shows 2 malfunctions. That is not acceptable. And in case you're wondering, if you do shut off the car, it does show 2 malfunctions, and it comes on every single time. So we're gonna have this coded out today. Another thing I would also like to have coded out is the bulb out malfunction. So if you remember on 210s, if your light bulb goes out, it'll show you a malfunction saying that the light is out. So I want to disable that completely or set the voltage to lowest possible setting because I want to run all LEDs on this car. All right, here is the cold start. A small handful of people have asked me what car cover I use, and I use the Cover King Sand Stretch. So here I have one for my 124. I just got it, and I was actually kind of surprised it fits over the AMG body kit pretty perfectly, and I did not request any additional things on this car cover. The indoor car cover, very soft material on the outside as well as the inside. It's very nice and soft. Custom fit for the car, so perfect fit. You see here it is on my E320 convertible. Got the mirror cutouts. It even has a cutout for the standing star. Nothing exposed, of course, except the bottom of the tires. You just can't get those. But yeah, pretty happy with it. Cover King Sand Stretch. So go coverking.com if you want yours. I'm not sponsored by them. I just genuinely like the product. It's actually my friend Jeff that got me into this. He uses it on all his cars, and I think the black look is super cool. All right, I just did the valve cover gaskets on this car because it was leaking, as well as the oil cooler seals. So now it should be leak free. A couple little things I want to point out. We're draining the coolant right now. I also did a drain and fill on the hydraulic fluid for the SLS and the automatic transmission fluid. Alignment on this car is ass. We got some pretty bad inner wear, so we'll get that addressed soon as I get the spacers to run the monoblocks. So the previous owner told me there was a metal skid plate, and I really didn't believe it because it just looked like the plastic one, but turns out the rear engine cover is made out of metal, and it's super heavy, so that caught me off guard. So that's cool to see that I was there. Here are the stop techs. These are gonna go away. But overall, I'm really pleased with seeing the underside of this car. It actually has an H&R front and rear sway bar, which I was not expecting that. And if we take a look, it has primary, secondary cats with no resonator and super spare muffler. All right, we got a large update on both cars. So during my search for the wagon, I obviously stopped doing a lot of stuff to the 210. I basically just parked it and drove it here and there. Now that we were in the motion of doing things on the wagon, as you can see, we have the monoblocks on finally. I got more motivation to kind of finish this car up because it really didn't need a whole lot. Well, it kind of did, but it really wasn't that bad. So let's actually go in chronological order here. So on the wagon, I got the car with about 192,000 miles when I got back to my house from the trip. So 192, I made a plan to change the oil at 195. I'd change oil when I first got back, obviously, but the next planned oil change is at 195. I also wanted to line up the valve cover gaskets to do at the same time because it's just a good time to do it right before an oil change the valve cover gaskets. So while I was showing this car to my friend, he noticed that the oil cooler was leaking. So we also did the oil cooler seals. There's 3 of them, and then there's like a little something underneath right behind the belt that also kind of leaks. It wasn't leaking on this car, but we just decided to do it anyway because we were right there. So did the valve cover gaskets, did the oil cooler. I did not do the breathers. I know everyone always says, why you do the breathers? If the breathers aren't leaking, don't do them because generally they last a really long time and the valve covers don't. So I will get like probably a couple valve cover changes, like probably up to 5 before the breathers will start leaking. So what's the point of doing them every single time? Because these valve cover gaskets will honestly last at most 2 years. I did the same thing on this car. The last time the breathers were resealed was 8 years ago. Think about that, 8 years ago, and they're still not leaking. It's not even sweating, which is crazy. So people that say, why don't you do the breathers? It's a waste of time, it's a waste of money. Just wait until they leak and then do them at the next valve cover gasket change. So while we did the valve covers, I also had an opportunity to change the SLS fluid. So I drained it and then add new fluid. I did new coolant. I figured why not, just try to get everything as fresh as possible. Drain and fill the transmission. I didn't do a full trans service because one was recently done, but I figured doing a drain and fill is safe, and it was. The fluid was nice and clean, which is what I wanted to see. So because the SLS ties into power steering, that's all taken care of. So the only fluid I haven't changed yet is the brake fluid, which will wait. When I change the brake calipers on this car, that's the time to do it. And the differential, I didn't do a differential because it was done not too long ago. So while the car was in the air, I did also adjust the SLS. So right now, this is not the height it was set at, but I had it on maximum low. So basically I was riding on the springs, which is actually not good. You don't want that. The stance was really nice. It was super low. That was just temporary. I knew I didn't want to ride that low because I wanted to change the spring pads on this car when I did the wheels. What ended up happening is we did the valve covers and the fluid changes, and then next up did the sedan. So the sedan kind of needed a lot of work. So it absolutely needed motor mounts. They were completely collapsed. I'll show you some photos, but yeah, they were really bad. Transmission mount was definitely need a replacement. The front flex disc was shot bad. Like, I should not have been driving the car. I did the center support as well as the rear flexus, you know, just do it all at the same time. And you know, while we were doing all that, I figured let's try to do the subframe mounts, and we actually did them. Totally sucked. Horrible job. Never want to do it again. So I'll show you some of the pieces we have left. So we have to bang out the outer shell. So I'm sure if you've done the subframe before, you'll know what I'm talking about. So yeah, basically this is inserted into there when it's not crushed. Actually, these are not in horrible shape. There's some cracking there. It goes all the way through. So this was probably due for replacement, but honestly, the rear end, while it didn't feel as good as it does now, it really didn't feel that bad. I probably could have gone away with not doing this, but it was just a good idea to do it. So we did have access to the subframe bushing press, like the special tool that you're supposed to use. These are the front bushings, so the ones that are closer to the front of the car, and then there's ones that are towards the back. Those are kind of upside down. So the tool on the front ones is kind of useless. All it does is remove this piece, and then you still have the outer cup, which is way hard to get out. The tool will not get this piece out. You will just have to bang on it with a hammer and a chisel, and it sucks, and you're gonna have to crush it. And this is probably the minimum you have to crush it. If you crush it more, it'll come out easier. So yeah, that was several hours. We lit it on fire. Eventually got it out. The other ones were easy to take out. So this is the rear one. It's upside down, and the bushing press presses it out, press it in. Super, super easy. These were not as bad as the fronts. See, there's a part number. Press makes this super easy. Doesn't so much for the other one. So while the press does get the rear ones in, the front one, it does not. It is pretty useless, honestly, besides taking the inside of this out. So to get the new ones into the subframe, I just went to Home Depot, got a 6-inch and a 4-inch C-clamp. We lubed it up and just basically clamped it down really hard. It felt really bad the whole time doing it. It felt like something was gonna break, slip, and hurt something, but luckily it actually pressed it all the way in. So yeah, that was not a pleasant experience. It took super long. Like, the whole job was literally held up by the rear subframe. Everything else went fairly smooth except for the transmission mount. I did Black Series engine and trans mounts, so here they are, you know, the 240 part number. And then I did the SLK or CLK Black Series transmission mount. Unfortunately, it does not have the same mounting holes as the stock style. You see you have one here and then one directly across. The Black Series has one here and then one on the left, one on the right, no center. You can either drill out the mount, which is fine. You know, there's enough metal there, it's okay. This is really hard metal. We didn't have the right drill. What ended up happening was, like, you know that plate this mounts onto at the bottom? We just drilled holes on the plate for the left and right and then added a screw, and that was okay. So it mounts pretty close like factory, except now we got extra holes, which really, it's not that bad. It's just not as pretty as it once was. I'm not mad at it. I could probably find the right part number for a factory one with all the right holes, but it works, and the metal's not compromised. It's really thick metal. If you've been watching my videos and pay attention, you'll know, like, I think it was 2 years ago, I pointed out how my flex disc was really bad, and yeah, it is really bad. So in the beginning, it was just this side that was horrible. I think that's new. That's a new piece that's missing. So this is just a matter of time. You see how badly cracked it is. Not too long away from disaster. I can actually move it quite a bit. Won't pick up on camera, but yeah, it's moving a lot. So it did the front flexus, it did center support bearing, rear flexus, all of it. And unfortunately, that took a long time. So we're not able to get to the last couple things. So it's really not that bad. We got a fuel pump. I'm just doing it as preventative. Fuel filter. I have a crank position sensor, which now I think I'm not going to change out because the car has no long starts. So I'll probably just keep this on hand. It's always good to have a backup. And finally, the voltage regulator. I think mine is worn. I've never changed it. I'm just going to do it as preventative. There's no symptoms. There's no symptoms for any of this. It's just due to age. I've had the car 10 years and I've never done any of these. So yeah, that's not good. You should do the fuel filter right when you get the car if you have no record of it. This is just all preventative to get the car up to speed, so that way it's like daily driver reliable again. This is pretty much all the same work we did to the 124. This is what this car has done. This car has pretty much everything done now. It is 100% ready to go. So I just wanted that car to be at those same levels. I really did neglect it pretty bad when I was looking for the wagon. Just, I didn't want to have tie up time and money into it until I had this car, because I really had to focus on just getting it, and that was a different mountain to climb. So that kind of gets you up to speed on the sedan, and you'll notice I did switch the wheels from the wagon to the sedan. Now we'll talk about what came next, which was the wagon and the wheels. So you'll remember that I had these wheels on the Sedan. Unfortunately, they were chipped. I think we mentioned in the last video. Had them resprayed. Now they're perfect. Now that's why there's no center cap. I'm just waiting for the paint to fully harden. So in order to get these wheels on the car, it was not as simple as just throwing them on. This car unfortunately came with wheel studs. Now they were high quality wheel studs, but they were still wheel studs that I did not like. And if you know anything about wheel studs, getting the correct R12 ball seat lug for an M12 stud is not as easy as you think it is. Of course, they have like the cheap, whatever, off-brand lug nuts. So that was problem number one, was the studs. Problem number two, because the fenders of this car are so wide, these wheels would be super sunken in. I think I showed you in the last video how sunken in they were. It's not something I want to run with. So I had to get spacers, and I figured if this car is wide enough, I want to use the factory lugs, which you can see I retained. I want to get a bolt-on style spacer. So the spacer will bolt onto the car's hub and have its own threads, and it has the factory M12 threads, so I can use my factory lugs. So this car, when I got it, it came with 20mm spacers in the back and 10mm spacers in the front on those big 19 and 20-inch AMG wheels. I retained a 20 in the rear. I went with a 12mm in the front when I had the Style 3s on here, and it fit pretty good. So I knew to get the rear looking normal-ish, you need a 20mm spacer, and that kind of worked out because the minimum spacer thickness you need from H&R to have a bolt-on style spacer is 20mm, and 20mm is what the factory lugs stick out, so it just barely clears. Well, it's actually like 19 and change, but it just barely clears the spacer, so I knew that's what I needed. And finding the H&R 20mm spacers in the M12 bolt size in black was actually pretty challenging. I managed to find a set on eBay, and they finally showed up. I actually got lost for a little bit, so that was nice that they finally showed up after I think like 2 months, so I was getting worried there. And that was the main holdup, was the spacers. We were just waiting on that. So I knew in the rear it'd be okay, but with the monoblocks, it's pretty aggressive in the rear. The front's of course aggressive. It's pretty flush. So the fitment with a 20mm spacer is really aggressive. This is probably the most flush car I have. I thought the 124 was really flush, but it looks tucked compared to the 210 Wagon. And then this car I downsized. It had a 12mm spacer in the front. I went to 10, and these I thought were pretty flush. And they actually are not that bad, but they're way more sunken in than these are. So luckily, I haven't had any clearance issues except for the rear fender liner, like in the back towards the bumper. That kind of touches a little bit under harsh bumps, but other than that, it doesn't rub. That's something I'm willing to live with because I do want to keep the factory lugs. I prefer that. It's way better. It's way easier. It just makes the car a lot more like factory. This is pretty much as close to no spacers as we can get while using spacers. That's just kind of the way I wanted to do it. So while we're taking the studs off and adjusting the suspension, I went to a number 5 spring pad in the front. The stance, I think, is much better. I want a little bit of wheel gap, so I think this is pretty ideal for me. I want something a lot like the E60, so it's got a tiny bit of gap, and then the rear is supposed to be a little less because if you remember, the fender arches of this car are uneven. So if you have even wheel gap front and rear, the car is raked, you know, the face is lower than the rear, which is kind of lame. The stance I like on 210s is level from the frame, so if you measure from the frame in the front and the rear, it should be even front and back. Basically, when you look underneath the car, it should be completely level to the ground regardless of wheel gap. And that's how my Sedan is. And honestly, of all the 210s I've driven, the ones I drive the best are the ones that are level from the frame. I don't know why Mercedes decided to do uneven wheel arches. I think that's super stupid. It should just be even. That way when you have even wheel gap, it's level from the frame, but that's just how they did it. When I got the car, the rear had way more gap than the front, so this car was severely raked, and it drives so much better now. It's a completely different car, honestly. So with the stance all set up, the wheels and tires dialed in, the car no longer leaking with fresh fluids, this car was ready for an alignment. This car had bad alignment since the day I got it, so it always pulled to the right. It had really bad negative camber wear in the back. The inside edges of the tires were worn, as you remember. So the front wheels also had really bad toe wear. It looked like camber wear because I was on the inside, so I believe that would be toe out where the inside edges wear. But we got a good alignment now. I went to Chi-Works. I believe that's how you pronounce it. It's either Chi-Works or Che-Works, but they're in La Habra. Highly recommend them. Best alignment shop in probably California. Car drives super straight. Now the car is finally at a good stopping point. It runs good. It drives good. it looks good. So right now, I think I'm gonna hold off on the brakes. The stop tech's gotta go. It's just, they're not ceramic. I know people are gonna yap at me saying, oh, get semi-metallic or whatever BS. No, if it's not ceramic, it's garbage. This stop tech's gotta go, because finding replacement pads and rotors is not as easy as it once was. Centric bought out stop tech, and ever since then, finding replacement parts is more difficult. Of course, there is workarounds to this, but my best solution, in my opinion, is doing something that's factory or OEM, something that's always readily available. So yeah, stop techs do clear the monoblocks. I believe if I didn't have the spacer, it's still clear, but they gotta go. It's just too dusty. Like, this is just maybe 100 miles. It's probably hard to tell on camera, but it's definitely darker than the rear. I don't like that. This car has ceramics, that car has ceramics, and they're both Akebono. And it's just way better. It's like, why would you run anything else in a street car? But yeah, that will have to wait until later. Gonna do a couple small things here and there. The next thing that's actually up for it is the exterior lights and the interior lights. We're gonna go all LED. Also, what's next is black grille. I kind of wanted to match my sedan, so I was ceramic coating this. You see, I got my center caps as well. This car came ceramic coated, and I really wasn't a believer in ceramic coating until I got this car, but it keeps the car a lot cleaner. It's a lot easier to clean, so I'm gonna stick with it. It's a good feeling to finally have all the cars kind of dialed in. I would say the wagon is the best shape of all. The tires are the best. Unfortunately, the wagon wore through the fronts on that because of the bad toe on the alignment, so those fronts will have to get replaced, but they're not so bad. They're not down to the cords, and the balance is off on all four of those wheels. And also, these wheels are wrapped. Kind of see right there. I'm thinking about getting them painted. This car also needs tires, but the rear has -3 degrees of camber, so it does wear the inner edge, unfortunately. So there's an update on what's going on. The Fake 55 is back. The wagon is done. I wasn't really filming a whole lot because I just focused on doing all that work. We spent a lot of time. I really just had to focus. I couldn't just stop and film in between. Otherwise, everything would have taken 10 times as long. So kind of unfortunate about that. I really would have liked to have filmed and taken my time, but we were on a time crunch. We got them done. Now we got 2 usable cars. All right, this is what I've been waiting for. Just turn the car on. No malfunctions, no error lights. That's just the parking brake on the left there, but car runs and drives like it looks. It should be nice. Throwing it back to my high school days. Right before school, I grabbed one of these in my sedan. So it's cool now, 10 years later, we got our wagon finally and doing the same thing. Haven't been doing a good job filming today. I was just too busy enjoying the car. I took it out to get lunch with my friend, and he actually got to drive it, and he really liked it. He actually got to see this car when I first got it and just put the wheels on. So it was pretty cool. He noticed a little bit of the difference I made. But yeah, take a look. That's how the car sits on the monoblocks with the spacers. Pretty good stance. It's borderline almost too aggressive, but it's good enough. I've been so busy just working on these cars the past few weekends that it's nice to have a day that I could just drive it and enjoy it. It's fairly clean, but it got pretty dirty, you know, just going by I was driving by the beach today, so a little dusty. Brake dust, of course, from the stop techs. We're cruising with the windows down, sunroof open. Really nice feeling. So I did park this thing right on the beach, and someone came by and complimented the wheels. They actually knew what monoblocks were, which is kind of cool to see. You know, these wheels are pretty popular even among common people. It's just such a great feeling. You know, we spent all this time working on the car, doing little improvements here and there, and it's adding up, and now the car is in a really good state. All that work really did pay off.